Okay. Before I start, I'm just going to make sure everyone can actually hear me because sometimes my voice is a bit quiet. Is that okay for everyone? Okay. If no one can hear me, just put your hand up and let me know. But I'm obviously really pleased to be here with you, Cathy. We've known each other for quite a long time now, actually. And the reason why we know each other is through archives. And I think it might be good just to set the scene a little bit, just to talk a little bit about Art 360 Foundation, which Cathy you were one of the first participants in that programme. And Art 360 Foundation, it was an independent charity that supported living artists and artist estates with archiving and legacy planning. And it was really set up, I guess, in response to a lack of provision for that kind of support for artists in the public domain. Artists have a lot of stuff. They amass a lot of things throughout the course of their career. And there's not really any kind of public resource to support artists in managing all of that and in helping their beneficiaries or the people that will be there after they're no longer around to care for it and continue that legacy. It was set up by Mark Waugh and Jelaine Towerdross in 2016, and Art 360 closed in 2024, but I hope that the legacy of that work continues on. We supported about 54 artists and estates with tailored bursary programs, which were delivered by freelance archivists and other specialists in artists' homes and studios. And that's where I met Cathy. And I think it would just be really great to begin just by reflecting on what your experience was like of the initial archival process.
Yeah, no, it's just, I mean, basically, when this was set up, and obviously my advanced years now, there's the whole issue of I've been working for 40 years now as an artist. So, you know, my archive comprises of black and white photographs when I was a student, slides, transparencies, 5x4 transparencies, and some things went onto disc, and you know everything almost was obsolete really, and a bit confused. Like, and you know, like I mean, I don't know about anybody else as an artist. Like, it's easy to get confused by your own stuff. Like you just kind of like and also being 65 this week, you know, my computer skills aren't that great. So even at the point that everything went digital into email, you know, I'm still a bit confused. Like, and I find it actually really easy to get super confused by what my computer's not doing and what have you, which is a little bit of a problem when you're then trying to kind of go through images. Now, one of the brilliant things that Ashley here was sent to my studio to help scan all of my slides, transparencies, there was discs, there was black and white photos, there was all kinds of stuff that just was all in kind of, and I still kept it, it was in boxes sort of thing, so that was a tick, but there was no real like order to it, you know, and it wasn't like I could go to my computer and ask it for an image in 1995 or whatever. It just wasn't there, you know. It would take a day just to find that image and sort of a bit of weeping or whatever. So it was very much kind of like, for me, the main thing was organising the images, which Ashley very bravely took on, like, you know, and it's a big work because you've got to go through everything and the slides and touch everything up and, you know, kind of get it. But I'm now pleased to say that I've got a show next year at the Palais de Tokyo. After years and years of not having a show, and it's a kind of retrospective over 40 years. And, you know, thank you, Ashley, because I've been going onto the computer and just managed to put together a beautiful catalogue resume for the gallery, and like, you know, and it's a big work. And I would really say to anybody who's an artist, like, you know, especially a bit older and has stuff that travels between technologies, to, you know, that is a really, you know, good use of time if you can find a way to either do it yourself or get someone to help you, because it is really difficult if it's not now just on your computer and you can just WeTransfer it straight away to somebody, because that's what people kind of now expect. So, and there's no point saying, oh, it's in the box, you know, like it's something that takes time. And that was the main thing that, you know, I personally used the grant for, you know, was to get that organised. So that was it.
Yeah. And so just thinking about the Palais de Tokyo exhibition, which is opening next April. Maybe we should explore a little bit more how you're referencing the archive now.
Right.
In relation to that exhibition and how it's been curated.
Right, okay, so the photographs, hurrah, we got that under control more or less. The big problem with the next bit of the archiving, you know, which is, you know, one, after that length of time, and because everything was in paper, everything was in faxes, you know, lots of faxes were faded, galleries I worked with and such like. And also, and this is the real kicker, I didn't get the names and addresses of the collectors who bought my work, particularly in the 90s. It was a little, I don't know why it was sort of almost like acceptable that you just didn't kind of send invoices to the gallery. The gallery paid you when they felt like it. They never really told you who owned it or an address or, you know, sort of quite important details. So, and as an artist, you think, oh, hurrah, you know, I miss your so-and-so's probably got that still. And of course, 40 years later, you know, there's all kinds of, you know, you don't have an email for people because it was pre-email. Sadly, some people have died, so you just don't have any contact with their estate or even know how to, you know. And some of them, I didn't even know the name, and I had no information, which I'm now working on this sort of pushing this ongoing. So almost don't do it like I've done it. Really, it's almost like, you know, it took me on Sunday, I spent all day going through boxes trying to find the owner of one piece of work that was made in 1991 or 92. And I finally found it and was like, oh my God. It's like, you know, and I suppose keeping things is really important, you know. And the trouble is, as we all know as artists, like, it requires a storage, it requires boxes, it requires some kind of system, and it doesn't almost matter. There isn't a right or wrong way to do a system. I think it's just to know if you can find it. If you worked with Jennifer Flay in 1996, that there was a file for Jennifer Flay, and there's a fighting chance you might find what you're looking for. But, you know, it is, I suppose now we all have our files on the computer, and it's just, I was thinking about this morning, like, it's almost like I'm dealing with sort of old person's problem in a way, you know. But technology keeps changing. I mean, I remember the first time I saw a fax come out of a machine, and I really died of excitement, you know. So it's like kind of, and of course they've all faded, so they've all disappeared. But it's like, you know, and I remember when we had discs full of photographs, and that was like, oh, so exciting, and they're all kind of degrading, and in fact the things that are not really degrading so much are the slides and the transparencies. Weirdly enough, like, I don't know if anybody's looked for their own archives recently. It's like the slides, you know, they might have faded a bit, but we really kind of kicked along some of those old slides, didn't we? It's like kind of, you know, and actually I've used those a lot. The slides that we touched up, and now with, you know, someone who knows what they're doing again. So anyway, that's what I'm rambling on here for a second.
No. I think it's a really important point. I think also that just the challenge of being an artist and just trying to sustain your practice, you know, during the 90s and dealing with the power dynamics of the art world and everything like that, and also like keeping on top of the admin of essentially being like your own archivist is almost impossible, actually. And so I think that most artists at a certain point have the challenge of looking back and thinking, okay, I'm going to have to like retrace my steps a bit. And it is just so incredibly helpful to bring someone else into that process to help you make sense of like looking through all those boxes and not feeling overwhelmed by that process, which I think is a natural feeling when you're looking back at decades of work, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And of course, you're never going to wake up in the morning and think, I must just go through my archive boxes from 1995. But you're always going to find something better to do until you need to know that information. And I suppose, yes, if you assign someone to help you do that, then it forces, even if they go through it before you go through it or whatever. It makes a lot of difference.
And what about the way that you actually use your archive in relation to like your own practice now? Because when I was in your studio, I feel like you reference your own archive, like photos from the Whitechapel exhibition, 1987.
Yeah.
And to make new work now for the Palais de Tokyo exhibition?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's kind of cyclical. Like, as an artist, I mean, you kind of start, we talked about it the other day, it's like you start off as a young artist, you sort of make things quite instinctively, or you just sort of don't really have to sort of, just pick up what you can and try and make something. And in a way, that kind of feeds everything else because it's the instinctive thing that you first kind of like grabbed, if you like. But it goes in circles, at least I do, and it's sort of like when I was in 1984, for example, I don't know really why I made it, but I made it a pony-sized unicorn skeleton sculpture, which I've still got, and that's always been in my storage. So that's the other issue, is that storage. But like, I've had this pony-sized unicorn, and he's huge, like in my studio for 40 years, sort of transporting him from one studio to the next. And just recently, using technology of photogrammetry and 3D printing, we've made one that's this big, that's a perfect bronze replica of my full-size unicorn, and it's so exciting to sort of have that. And the number of times that I thought I would throw that unicorn away because it was like, because it was so big, like I needed a whole stable. It was like kind of like a livery, like for the storage. Like, but there was a reason to hold on to it. There's some things I haven't kept, I have to say, like big sculptures, but that particular one I've kept. But it's a really good example of how things go in circles. And that one I showed you the other day in the studio, that I also made when I was 26 or something. And most recently, I've been making work with small pregnant figures that are about this big. And I unwrapped this sculpture a few weeks ago, and part of it was a little clay figure that was like exactly the same scale and pregnant. If that makes any sense, like little pregnant sculpture was part of another sculpture that just happens to be part of that sculpture, and I'd completely forgotten that. But it's literally the same scale, isn't it, as the things that I'm working on now? You couldn't really make it up. It's like very strange because I'd completely forgotten about it, to be honest, that particular thing. So I think what you keep, what you then come back to later in life is really important, and it's easy not to be able to keep things. That's kind of because storage is a huge issue unless you really sell a lot of work, and it's a different issue. But keeping early work is really important, I think.
I guess like instinctively you just know that is going to be a definitive. We have like an attachment in a way to the work.
I think it's a sort of it's a kind of pact you make with yourself as an artist, isn't it? You sort of like that you have to take. If you don't take yourself seriously, no one else is going to do it. In a way, it's like, because I've been an artist long enough that I've had whole tranches of time when nobody's given me the time of day. Like, but it's just like, that's just the way it works. And you've got to keep the faith in a way that, it's important, and all of your drawings are important, and all the things that, get left behind when you make work, bits and pieces of ideas and experiments, they're important, but the storage of them is challenging, and I think that any artist would agree with that. It's just challenging to keep that belief, I suppose, in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when things aren't going so well, because just like, get rid of it, it's like kind of
yeah, there is definitely, I think, a practical cost, right, to keeping that work. And I think at the same time, it's kind of recognition of yourself, the value of that in yourself, to kind of actually keep the work, but also think about your archive too. Because it's kind of a recognition in the sense of the value of your own practice, basically. And I think all of the artists that apply for Art 360, there was that sense that they were at a point where they're ready to kind of like look back at their practice and actually understand the significance of that. And the journey they've been through to get to where they were, including like almost not just the kind of key, most visible public moments, but also all the places in between as well. And just in like relation to the Palais de Tokyo exhibition, what has the process been like of getting kind of the key works into the exhibition, and are you also thinking about maybe sharing aspects of your work that haven't been maybe as visible publicly?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. I would say, to answer your first question, getting work has been this challenge of finding the owners of a lot of pieces, which has been quite a challenge for me and the curator. And of course, as I said before, some people have died, and that's quite complicated to negotiate, if you haven't got a relationship with that person's family or them personally. The other thing with this particular show, and I suppose this is going to become more of an issue, is we haven't been able to buy anything in the United States. So there's a whole tranche of time, particularly in the 90s, where all my work was being sold in the States. So there's a kind of big gap. And I was getting a little bit grumpy about that. But then I went on holiday and I came back and thought, I'll just make something that talked into that. Now that I'm 65 and I'm not 35, I'm just going to have a play with looking back at this work and try and make new work that, not references it, but kind of, so trying to have a bit of fun with it as well, because obviously looking at it for the show, I've been looking at all this old work and thinking what's significant and why I stopped doing it and all that kind of stuff. So at the moment, I was supposed to be doing something else, but I've decided to do something. We'll see what happens. It's a bit of an experiment. It's a bit kind of it's only 4 months of the show, but hell, it's we'll see what happens. But it's kind of quite interesting to pick up an old material, an old idea, and just sort of see where it is in my head now, because obviously my emotional imperatives are completely different, on all levels. So that's kind of quite interesting. So that's a way of solving the problem of not, because I think globally now we have to fall for, the issue of it not coming from America is nothing really to do with global warming. It's just to do with America, really. It's kind of at the moment. But anyway, the second part of the question was, then we were looking at all of the things in my studio, because for me, studio practice is the thing, if you like, especially the last 20 years or so, I haven't really had shows. So for me, my studio practice is everything. And kind of how do you express that in an exhibition? Because normally you kind of show the finished things, it's all finished or whatever. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to have a room in the middle of my exhibition, which is drawings and stuff, like the stuff that I keep, which is drawings and half-made things and working things out, how to make things, and kind of bits left over, and it's just going to fill the entire space, just pinned to the wall. It's not going to be in frames. I don't treat drawings like precious. Very rarely do I kind of frame them. So it's just going to be a bit like a kind of laboratory, if you like just going into, I don't know how it's going to work really. I mean, that's sort of it's going to be 40 years worth of mad drawings, really. I think it'd just be kind of quite an interesting way to kind of present my archive, if you like. That's my archive. Is my, So I mean, all the drawing. Having said I don't really kind of frame or sell drawings, or whatever, but most of them are quite significant to me, and I kind of can remember a drawing, even if it was just on the back of an envelope. It's kind of because sometimes you have a sudden idea, and all that's there is the envelope, and it pushes the work. So it's kind of quite difficult to kind of describe that there is that kind of personal relationship with these bits and pieces of paper. And papers where I've done titles and things and written whatever notes to myself. So I don't know. I mean, I think hopefully it'll be kind of quite interesting, to just see 40 years of brain cells on the wall. It's a bit because it's, I don't think many artists. I'm quite trying to think if anybody has done. I'm sure someone has, but it's kind of and kind of the most least precious work and do it. So that's kind of be the middle of the exhibition. So it's kind of. You can see. I mean, it's my archive, and why not? It's my party, so come and see. It's kind of I don't want to kind of follow a set idea of what an exhibition should look like.
Yeah, and I think what's quite nice is that there's actually no set idea of how you should just show an archive in a public space, because archives are so inherently private in a lot of ways. And what's particular, I think, about like artist archives, your archive, is that it's a live resource. It's something that's being used. It's something that's very much part of your practice, and it's like that is the energy of your work. Actually, that's kind of what happens behind the scenes. And then out of that are these kind of like really beautiful, harmonious, like perfectly installed sculptures, you know. But behind the scenes are this really like intense, unpredictable kind of like process of making, basically. And I think the like process of archiving enables you to place that in the middle of this exhibition, right?
Hopefully. I mean, it's a sort of I suppose it's kind of risk, because it might be, I don't know what it might be. I suppose it's like, you know, you always have to think how you should do things properly or something, you know, but I kind of get over that now, so I'm just like, you know, like kind of it's I would have probably worried about it more when I was younger, if that makes sense. To kind of make that kind of, because normally you in a show, you're lucky if you have a few sketchbooks open, like, you know, I did a drawing. And it's like, I've never had that kind of relationship to my drawing, particularly. It's very much more urgent, working things out, kind of, or trying to get a vague idea of what something might look at, like kind of thing. But
definitely. And I think just thinking about like your own photography of your studio space over time, I mean, that is almost like an archive within an archive, right? You've actually documented your studio at like different times of day over periods of time, and a kind of, it seems like looking back at that sometimes remember time, the time in which you made work. And those are the sorts of like really intricate parts of an artist's practice that sometimes never get to be seen or kind of understood. And I think that to me just seems quite interesting, that the conditions in which you've worked, that kind of private space basically has been really important. And it makes me think about the Virginia Woolf A Room of One's Own and the Newnham College Commission in Cambridge. It would be good to talk a bit about that.
I mean, it's sort of like, I don't know if you're familiar with this essay by Virginia Woolf. She gave it to the female students of Girton and Newnham College in Cambridge, 1928, something like that. And basically, her premise was she was just trying to explore why the female universities were so well endowed, which was the case. Like, they were quite recent. You know, they'd only been going for about 25 years when she gave these lectures. The women in the universities, those two colleges, still weren't entitled to get degrees until 1948, if you believe that. But they were there, like really intelligent women studying, you know. That was like kind of very, and so she just did this essay, and the basic premise was why have been so few women acknowledged as, you know, thinkers, writers, poets, you know, scientists. And, you know, it's the bleeding obvious, you know, really, but it's like kind of, you know, so at one point she was talking about a story that she invented of Shakespeare's sister, and what would have happened to Shakespeare's sister if she'd have made that journey to London, you know, and she would have most likely been raped and destitute before she got there, you know. And it's like, you know, it's a beautifully written essay, and it's like, it really kind of, and it's funny, and it's like, you know, but her main premise is that women at that point, you know, as women, we wouldn't become more central to the world of thinking until we were able to sit and think, which is obvious. But the notion, you know, I've been so blessed. I've been an artist all my life, and I've done a bit of teaching, but not too much. I've been super lucky to have had my room, my studio, and to have the kind of luxury to sit and think and procrastinate. And that is, you know, in our time, we take it for granted, but it's in 1928, which wasn't that long ago, like 100 years ago, like it was a luxury, and it was not available to all. And it was, you know, it's really important to remember that, I think, because it's a very recent history that we've had that freedom to think. And, you know, basically the premise of her thing is that once you get the chance to think, you can get beyond your thinking to invent things. Like, and you know, change things a bit, science, poetry, writing, you know, whatever it is that you're able to kind of reinvent the wheel, if you like, and you have to have time to do that. So that was what the title of my piece that I made for this college was, Beyond Thinking. So it was just sort of like a kind of, you know, thinking about that notion that you stand still and think, you know, so
kind of being uninterrupted.
Yeah.
And I think it's always been quite like striking about your studio. I mean, I know the bed's not there anymore, but that like being able to kind of wake up in the night and have the idea and act on it. And I think the energy of your studio space and the way that it's been documented at night with the shadows of the work, I think is important, because it's like you see traces of that process in the actual final work itself. And you see the work differently when you can actually look at the documentation of the work in progress, I think.
Yeah, no, probably that's true. And I think it's sort of like, I suppose there's sort of sometimes that thing of sort of giving away your secrets or something, but I don't think you do, because I think it's just so sort of, you know, and I'm a very kind of last minute kind of worker, and so I treat it a little bit like a kind of extreme sport, because I'm never ready. Like, and so it's like maybe the last 48 hours of working before the work leaves, I'm practically working non-stop, and it's like, and I kind of like, I mean, it's sort of, I've always done it, so every now and again I try to train myself out of it, but it's possible. So you just have to sort of get this sort of adrenaline thing, and it's quite good because my work's quite hard work to make all the elements and the bits and pieces, and and you know, and sometimes it does get a bit monotonous because you just sort of sit, oh God, not 100 of these notes. It's like, but in my mind, I've got this dream that I'm only working with 100 of these things, whatever they are, and so it just has to be done. And you know, so I can listen to stories on the radio and everything's quite nice. But finally, I've got to put these things together into my dream. You know, and I never really leave enough time for that. So there is this kind of rush. Yeah, it's like an extreme sport. It's like a rush of, like, I have to get this thing to the goal, and it always changes. And you know, it's the middle of the night, and the light does weird things and stuff, like, you know. So it's a kind of, to me, that's my magic time, because it's sort of kind of, I kind of transcend that slightly repetitive craft element that, you know, it's, I mean, my work is quite crafty, but I think that has to transcend the craft and turn into something else in a way.
It's like a combination of two kinds of like intensity.
And it's kind of like your back brain kind of, I don't know if it sounds a bit weird when I say that, but it's almost like the subconscious sort of takes over a little bit, and you can't go, oh, should I get like this, like that? Like, all I see is sort of think about this for a bit long. Like, you just got to do it, and you've just got to go, okay, that worked. Yeah, that looks better than that. Do it, you know. And I do kind of quite love that intensity. I mean, it's a bit mad, but it's like I'm not hurting anyone in the process.
No, no. And I wonder as well, kind of, you're thinking about like back to like when you first started with the archive and stuff, if there's anything like happened during that process, like working with Ashley, of like going back to your work that surprised you, or if there's anything that you felt actually was kind of like not present, you'd like to kind of somehow, I don't know, like document or kind of create reference points for. So what you're talking about now is somewhere, you know, kind of like in between something that's tangible, but it feels really important to be able to reference in some way.
Yeah. I think it's sort of, some bits are tangible if I have time to take the camera out and the light's doing something really interesting at 3 a.m. or something, which sometimes it does, and sometimes you just don't have time to do that. And I suppose some of it is I suppose that is the secret, you know. It's like that point, it's a bit like the princess turning the straw into gold kind of thing, when Rumpelstiltskin comes in or something. There's that kind of point where you kind of, you know, it is, I hate to say magic, but it kind of, you know, and to be honest, it doesn't always work. I mean, I've never finished a piece of work until the transport company's banging on the door, like, and they just laugh at me now. So we just sit and wait and coffee and that stuff. Like, and so it is a bit of a risky process. I wouldn't recommend it to sort of anybody.
Yeah,
And it's kind of like, you know, I kind of like to think, or I like to hope that that intensity is then in the actual work, the finished work, you know, because that's where I, you know, it's done, it's gone, goodbye, and I've just got the sort of detritus and the bits of drawings and the bits where I was trying to work it out and stuff, and in a way, the art has to go off and get on with its job, if you like. That is not me standing next to it. What did I think and thought? You know, like I'm not interested in telling people what I thought. Really, you know, I never really have been. Like,
that's actually a really interesting point, because I think maybe for some artists, working on the archive is also about somehow thinking about the narrative of their practice, which is sometimes and often kind of like, I think, determined without the artist at the table at all. Actually, it's kind of determined for them in lots of different ways, and there's so many possible stories to tell, right? And I just wonder, like, if that resonates with you in any way, the idea of like kind of thinking about the narrative of your own work, if that's something you feel like you want agency over.
Yes, I think probably as one time passes and we get older. I mean, I've always been really resistant to what I call the artist statement. You know, like gobbledygook, kind of like, I just don't get it. Like, I don't understand how people in cold blood can sit and write these things, or get someone else to write them, or the press release or something. It's just like, because it almost also narrows things down. It's like when you're making work, or thinking about work, you're thinking about everything. You know, you're not thinking kind of one tiny little thought. You know, you might be thinking that thought along with all the other thoughts, but I don't think you're sort of like, well, maybe some people do, but I just kind of can't imagine this sort of thinking where you say, well, I think my work is about X. You know, and gobbledygook. I kind of can't do that. I've never been able to do that. It tends to be, if I say anything at all, it tends to be something more personal, like, you know, whatever, my personal life or whatever. I kind of don't tend to, at least I hope I haven't kind of, if someone could find, you said this, what's that? So it's like, you know, and some of that is because I'm quite dyslexic, so I find it very difficult to read what I would sort of say complex text that a lot of people do read, and I find that quite difficult. So it could just be that my brain just hasn't got any gobbledygook. You know, like, I mean, like, it could be that, I don't know. You know, so,
but I think it sounds like to me maybe like you don't like fix yourself in a way. Kind of want to leave things maybe like open to many possibilities. Basically, is that kind of
I think that's what I think. I mean, I suppose as artists we all want the work to be there and the other human to come along and look at that work and have an emotional engagement with that work. And at that point, for me, standing beside it saying, oh, it's about my confused sexuality, isn't actually that interesting, really, is it? I mean, it's like, kind of, so what? It's like, you know, it's not really going to enhance that person's, you know, because I want people to have that personal relationship.
Yeah.
And I want to put enough information in the work to have that kind of psychological information as well as the physical information of the object. But it's an alchemy. It's you know, it's not something where you know the recipe that sort of. I mean, that's why I'm interested in revisiting some of these stuff that I was doing in the 90s, sort of leather works and things, because there was a certain alchemy to those works, and I'm just kind of quite interested in what that, you know, kind of.
What's happened?
What's happened? You know, what happens when I do it now and I'm 65 and, you know, I don't have sex life? You know, what happens? You know, it's like, I don't know, like, it's really kind of quite interesting to me what
and I think like maybe unboxing, like kind of, like obviously literally, metaphorically, all that is like, I was sort of saying to you before, like visiting kind of like old or past versions of yourself, essentially from where you are now, and that can be maybe, I don't know what that experience is like. Maybe it could be quite a rewarding thing. Maybe it can kind of make you step back and like look at the whole trajectory of your work and like map and see the threads, basically. Because I think some people think about archiving as something overwhelming and maybe like a bit, I mean, there are definitely elements of it which are laborious and repetitive and all of those things. But actually, in the end, it can be extremely rewarding because you kind of have this view of your practice at different
and you can
over
actually
time.
see it as well. That's getting it out and seeing it, and that's obviously starting with what was working with Ashley was getting out and seeing it and kind of finding those little slides and kind of it does reignite memories of things, and because you can't remember everything for 4 years, you wake up every morning, let me go for the 40-year Roger Licks of what I've thought of, it always comes and goes, doesn't it? So,
it does.
So,
but also about like you and Ashley working together, for example, like
bring
Ashley into the conversation. But I think it's a really particular like relationship that you form with someone that comes into your space and isn't outside but comes in and actually like looks through and does that work with you and reflects with you and kind of looks back, and you have these like really sometimes really surprising and quite deep conversations actually, and things are revealed through the process. And I think if you can kind of alleviate the responsibility from yourself of having to do the very repetitive admin, you can actually have that dialogue because you can step back and actually just engage with the work.
But I mean, I think I was lucky because I got a grant to do that, and it's like not everybody has that, and I suppose what I've learned from, because I kind of probably wouldn't have got it together to kind of have the funds available to just and also make the time to do that. It's really just sort of. And looking at it now when I'm trying to kind of organise a show, I don't work with a gallery, so it's quite challenging because it's just me and the curator. Like, just try to file things as you go along. Things I sort of know now. It's like it doesn't mean if it's just a file with a name on it, it's fine. And if it's if it's a box with photos from the 90s in it, that's fine. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be. I saw a film once of Marina Abramovich, and she's got bunkers in upstate New York with all of her stuff, and it's beautiful and it's all filed and it's lovely, and that's really lovely. It's really nice. But most of us can't achieve that. Most of us can just about get our boxes in a shelf that we can afford to pay for the storage shelf. It's not, and that's still an archive. It's still your stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just don't throw things away that you might later regret. It's really an important thing I've learned over the years. It's like try if you can to not throw things away if possible, and do photocopy your faxes because they'll fade. But apart from
that's true.
Technology or something else in 20 years that people will be people will be laughing at Max, and
it's I mean it's true, and I think what you're saying is absolutely right, that it's an artist's archive is not the same and doesn't have to be the same as a museum archive. Like that's not, and actually there's a lot of value to an archive being something that's accessible and tactile and can be used. It actually opens up a lot more creative possibilities in a lot of ways, and I think if some more of that was in a museum archive setting, they would feel slightly more alive and engaged with, possibly.
Well, I think so. Yeah, because it's all on a computer now on a file. It's like it's very unalive in a way. I mean, my dad is an artist and he's 91 and he's got everything. And every now and again, one of us will go into one of his studios in the house. Oh, Daddy, do we really have to have all those shelves of your VAT from the 1992? And he says yes, because if I need to know what I did in 1992. I can go to that file and I will find, what the materials cost or what a sort of piece of work for. And, because he's 91, he's very pre-computers. He's good at using computers, to be honest, but he's got all the paper, and there is quite a lot to be said for paper. And
there is. It's the most reliable in so many ways.
And it's tactile. And it's like it's
finite.
Yeah, and it's easier to look through than a computer file. Kind of. So that is something that
It is.
It's a realization, because it's like,
yeah,
you think, especially if you're young, you just think, well, just put it in the drawer and it's sort of like, it's not the same.
It's not actually, and I think a lot is lost. A lot is lost in it, like the kind of the early digital period and beyond. A lot is, it's really hard.
Oh, that's my big gap.
Yeah, yeah.
Where I was letting somebody else do emails for me. And so I didn't have the writing, I didn't have the letters, I didn't have the emails, and I didn't have the information.
Yeah.
Because it was just on their computer, not on my computer, and it just went.
Yeah.
And that's a big blank, and it is literally when everyone started emailing each other, which was like late 90s, early 20s.
Yeah, it's almost like there needs to be a project just solely focused on that period of time.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of goes back and helps people like recover, because it's amazing that actually, I think pre-digital, the record keeping was really good.
Oh yeah,
because it had to be. It just had to be. It's just so precise. It's kind of amazing to see the level of like accuracy and precision, the way people kept records. I think maybe things are so fast now. And like very transient and stuff. It's much more difficult actually to keep on top of all those things. But that's a whole other
and I think
challenge.
Also people like myself got confused. I mean, like, email, like, it was just like, one had to be given a lesson, and like just how to sort of, everything about it, and it was just sort of like an alien concept, really. And it's if something is that alien, you tend not to use it. It's like you just run.
Yeah.
So, you could do my MS for me for the next 5 years and just sort of run away and go and do something else, and then you realise that you're a bit screwed later on.
But like in terms of like the contents of your archive, would you say that things like letters are important to you? The things, have you kept those?
Yeah.
And do you imagine that like in the future that's something that, because that was the question I was going to ask before we kind of open it up to audience, kind of like what you imagine for the future, and also kind of what you would suggest to others that are thinking about archiving?
I think it's a really good question, especially in relation to emails, because emails have replaced, as we all know, letters. It's sort of like, and it's, I suppose, if one was really kind of paying attention, you'd print out the important correspondences that actually, are important, be it personally or professionally, but like everybody else, the day is very short, isn't it? So you don't, but that's what I kind of wish that I'd done more of, because it's like trawling through emails to look for emails is like, 20 years worth, 25 years worth of emails is, kind of.
Yeah, it's a web of,
it's
a maze.
It's a maze. That's some questions. Anyone questions?
Yeah.